Ellen Townsend, tall, bony, shapeless as a marsh reed, reached Weinecker's. She wiped the perspiration from her face with her shirt tail and hurried inside. She liked hanging out at Weinecker's because of the soda fountain, comic stand, and import novelty section, where she found the shrunken head from Africa which hung from her bedpost. Now, however, she made her thin way through the crowd directly to the pharmacy at the rear of the store. Since stores were closed on Sunday, there was a long line at the pharmacy window, which she joined with a grim face. She was proud her mother had, for the first time, trusted her to pick up a prescription, and it would look bad to be gone for a very long time. "One hell of a line," said the gruff voice of the man who'd come up behind her. Not wanting to be rude, Ellen turned and gave him a little smile. He was as old as Grandfather Townsend, wore dusty overalls, and had a wart on his chin as large as a marble, which he tried to not stare at. "People ought to let those who have to get back go ahead of them, don't you think?" He wanted her to switch places, but that would make her late, Ellen thought. How though to refuse an adult? "Parlez-vous français?" she said after a pause. "Oh," he said, "you ought to speak American." Ellen put on a puzzled face and turned to face the front again. When it was her turn, she handed the pharmacist the bottle in her pocket and asked for a refill in the well-enunciated adult-like voice she'd begun to use when answering the phone. "Hey, you tricked me," came the gruff voice, and Ellen winced. The pharmacist glared at the man for an instant, then read the label on the bottle. "Sorry, but I can't refill it for you, honey." "I'm almost 13 and a half. If that's too young, my mother said you could call her for permission." "I'll vouch for her," said a voice suddenly at Ellen's side. It was Mrs. Phillips, a white-haired, biscuit-faced neighbor of the Townsends, who occasionally brought freshly made cookies over, just to chat. Ellen's mother said she was nosy and desperate for gossip since her husband retired and stopped bringing it home from the office. But Ellen liked her. It was just like her mother to think the worst of people. "Is someone sick at your house, dear?" Mrs. Phillips said. "Oh, no, ma'am." She wouldn't have said yes in any case. Family privacy, her mother's first commandment. But in fact, no one was sick. She had come only for her father's wake-up pills. "Well, that's good," Mrs. Phillips said. "I could drop the prescription off at her house if need be," she said to the pharmacist. "I live next door." "That's not the problem, ma'am," the pharmacist said. "Now, if you'll excuse us." Ellen flushed with embarrassment as she heard Mrs. Phillips' meek, "Of course," and the scuffle of her old lady's shoes stepping back. "It's not your age," the pharmacist said in a lowered voice. "The problem is that there are no more refills." He held the bottle toward her and pointed to a line on the label. "See, it says 0 refills remaining." "There must be some mistake," Ellen said. It was what her mother sometimes said to sales clerks and all she could think to say. She sensed, though, from his manicured fingernails and his white starched jacket, that any mistake would not be his. "Mistake? What do you mean?" "You know, something wrong, like, you mean the 0? "Yes," Ellen said quickly. "Not likely, but I'll check." He turned from the window to a file cabinet nearby and began to thumb through a drawer. "Figures that girl would be trouble," came the gruff voice behind her, and a couple of sighs from the people behind him. Ellen stiffened. "Here's the prescription," the pharmacist said. He laid a sheet of paper with Dr. Harris's letterhead on the counter and pointed to some text. "See, it says 5 refills. We stamp it when we refill it, and you can see down here it's been stamped 5 times. Why didn't your father come for them?" "Well, my mother's the one who runs errands, but she ran out of time because my sister's birthday party, she turned 5, and now they're getting dressed in a hurry for an important dinner because the party ran late because the clown..." The pharmacist raised his hand for her to stop. The line was quiet. Listening, Ellen thought. She stuck her head through the window until her lips were a breath away from the pharmacist's smooth, hairless cheek. "Would you call my mother, please, I can't go home without the pills." As the pharmacist studied her face, Ellen withdrew her head from his side of the window, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. "Look, miss," he said in a kind voice, "it's not your parents I need to talk to, it's Dr. Harris. I'll try to find him through his exchange. Come back in 5 minutes." Ellen waited in a nearby aisle where she could see the window but couldn't be seen by those in line. The farmer was her main concern, but also Mrs. Phillip, who might ask more questions. The clock over the pharmacy window, round and big as a plate, looked like the clocks at school, and its hands moved just as slowly. The smell of cherry cokes and giggles of girls about her age floated over the divider between the soda fountain and the pharmacy. Ellen felt a pang. Up until Christmas, those giggles would have been her and Ruthie. Keeping her eye on the pharmacy window, Ellen thought with excitement of a new dance she'd seen on American Bandstand called the Stroll. Perfect for tall girls because you wouldn't look silly ducking under a boy's arm when he twirled you, like say in the swing or jitterbug. And perfect for girls who never got asked to dance, like herself. It was boys in one line, girls in the other, and the next boy or girl at the top of the line would stroll down the middle of it to the slow, repetitive rhythm and words of the song it was danced to, which had the same name. Ellen sang the words to herself as the lazy-like, drawn-out music played in her head. "Come, let's stroll, stroll across the floor, ooh. Come, let's stroll, stroll across the floor, ooh." The muscles in her legs and feet contracted and released to the beat as though she was doing the 6-count step. It would be too embarrassing to actually move, except that on the 5th count, she couldn't resist bending her right knee and at the same time slowly dragging her other leg behind it. Ellen took a step back. Oh, Denise has a page out of her. There we go. Ellen, behind it. The movement was so perfectly matched the drug-out pace of the music, it gave her goosebumps. When the 5 minutes became 10, Ellen panicked. The pharmacy window was deserted, the last customer having just left, and the young pharmacist who'd served him had disappeared. Had her pharmacist forgotten her? Gone home for the day, perhaps? She was afraid to ring the bell on the counter, for if he was still trying to reach Dr. Harris, he would think she was impatient. Finally, her pharmacist appeared with a small brown bag. "Dr. Harris said no more refills until, well, I put a note in for your father." From half a block away, Ellen saw her mother standing on the porch of the gray stone Tudor, her red hair ablaze in the shafted sun, one hand held over her eyes like a visor, and the other on the hip of her dressing gown. Ellen sighed. She wanted to give the bag to her father herself and regale him with how she'd accomplished it, but her mother would, in one way or another, spoil the moment. "I swear you don't know the meaning of hurry, Ellen." Her mother clattered down the steps in her pointy-toed mules and over the cobblestone walkway to Ellen, who was getting off the bike. "If someone yelled fire, you'd be the last person out of the building." Her bottle green eyes glinted sharp as cut glass. Ellen took a step back. Her mother's arm could spring out like a jack-in-the-box, and her talon-like fingers crunch your shoulder before you knew it. When she'd explained what happened, her mother seemed impressed, and then held her hand out for the bag. "May I take it to Daddy so I could tell him what happened?" "No, he's still dressing and we're in a hurry." "Please, it won't take long." "You know better than to argue with me. I'll tell him. Put your bike in the workshop and come in the house. I need you to keep Jeannie out of my hair while I finish dressing." Ellen's hand twitched in protest as she relinquished the bag. The workshop, a small building in the corner of the large backyard, was used for storage, and that summer for what Ellen considered her laboratory. Neatly arranged on a work table against the back wall were chipped beakers, vials, rusty funnels, and other worn-out equipment her science teacher let her take on the last day of school. Plus, the little red transistor radio she'd gotten for her birthday, which she would have taken in her pocket to the drugstore if she'd known about the long wait. The area smelled vinegary. Most of her 7th grade experiments, the only ones she knew, involved vinegar. Now it smelled medicinal as well, from the glass of water mixed with mercurochrome holding 3 purple celery stalks. She intended to explain to Ginny, 5 being old enough to understand how plants get food. Ellen took a chisel from the windowsill and began to gouge a line about 1 inch long out of the rough-hewn pine table. With a strong, steady hand, she managed to align the gouge perfectly with the 3 already there. The first, for having to switch to a private school. The first for having to switch to a private school at Christmas break. The second, for having to give up Ruthie. A different social class now, her mother said. And the third, because of the permanent wave her mother made her get for the family Christmas party at the country club. This one was for not letting her take the pills to her father. A small thing compared to the others, and the table would be shreds if she gouged for her mother's minor cruelties. But this was especially mean. Her mother would be with her father all evening at that dinner party. She could have given Ellen 5 minutes with him. As she left the workshop, Ellen glanced at the cobweb-shrouded cluster of things near the door, which were brought from the old house. Flying squirrel cage, fishing tackle, BB gun, bows and arrows, go-karts, and so on. Home weekends and most evenings then, her father had had time to do those things with her. But since he started working for Gulfstream Loan Company, he was too tired on the few Saturdays, Sundays, and weeknights he wasn't working to do much of anything. Or when he had energy, her mother usually took first dibs. The green-eyed shrew, Ellen called her in private. She reveled in the coincidence of green as connoting envy and her mother's having green eyes. Ellen heard bawling the moment she entered the kitchen. Jeannie was sitting under the dining room table, which was so heaped with presents, limp balloons, and leftover party favors that the formal room, with its crystal chandelier, had an air of frivolous disarray. Jeannie's legs were crossed powwow style, and the hiked-up party dress revealed her underpants, which would have mortified her if she'd known. Her throw-myself-off-a-building sobs were accompanied by the yelps of a miniature white poodle struggling to escape her arm hook. Now and then, she spurted out words stuffy with mucus. Swim, Daddy, promised, birthday, being the most intelligible. Smart girl, Ellen thought. This was a resumption of the hissy fit Jeannie began that morning when her mother said the promised swimming was out because of a business dinner. Jeannie had stopped the fit when her mother threatened to call off the birthday party. But she could pitch it now to her heart's content. Come out this minute, I tell you, said Ellen's mother, who sat in a dining room chair bent over talking to Jeannie. People said her mother was pretty. The red hair, prominent cheekbones, and green eyes, and she especially looked it now, in the sleeveless white cocktail dress, which showed off her tan and accentuated, as her father said, her long legs. But pretty is as pretty does, and she was nobody's fairy godmother. Her mother began to swipe her arm through the air repeatedly, her silver bangles jingling, as though to reach Jeannie. Ellen grinned. The dining room table was wide and long, and Jeannie was positioned dead center. If her mother wasn't dolled up, she would have crawled under it and drugged the girl out by her hair, which was short and dense and tightly curled like lamb's fur. To keep them from being seen and told to get Jeannie, Ellen tiptoed through the hall to the living room where she could peek through the arch-shaped opening between the rooms. Come on, Jeannie, said Desi, whom Ellen thought might as well live with them for the hours she kept. I'll make you blueberry pancakes for supper. Desi, lodged in one of the armed dining room chairs, bent over toward Jeannie as far as her throw-pillow body allowed. You ought not treat your parents like this after they done give you a nice birthday party with a fancy cake, even a clown. Dwunk, Jeannie said between sobs. Hush up, Jeannie, her mother said. You don't know what that word means. Well, Daddy said, your father was mistaken, her mother said. The clown was sick, like I told you kids. Don't you dare going around saying he was drunk. As a skunk, Ellen thought. She smelled it when she helped the clown bring in props from the cab he came in. Her father caught on during the juggling act and called another cab to come get him. Ellen made Desi laugh later in the kitchen by imitating his juggling, lemon after lemon, falling to the floor. Your parents didn't know he was going to be sick. You ought to come out and act nice. No. Listen, hardhead, her mother said. If you don't stop that crying and come out by the time I count to 3, I'm going to lock those presents in the closet for a month. Half a day at the most, Ellen thought. Her mother never stuck to her guns when it came to Jeannie. She probably wouldn't have canceled the party. 1, 2... Her mother counted, pausing dramatically between the numbers. Then, at the sound of Ellen's father on the stairs, she hesitated as though unsure of whether to continue. Old Dan Tucker was a fine old man. Robert Townsend sang loudly with a rich, deep voice as he strode toward the dining room. Ellen was struck anew at how he was the most handsome father in the world. He wore a new sports coat, Bermuda cream, her mother called the color, when she brought it home from Gayfer's department store. It showed off his olive complexion, dark wavy hair, and big brown eyes. He smiled when he saw her, his lips as full and sensuous as a movie star's. Then he winked as he passed, the scent of Old Spice in his wake. Beat his wife with a can of Spam. Where are you going? Old Dan Tucker. Think I'm going to get my supper. He stopped singing when he reached the dining room table. Oh, woe is me, her father said in a booming stage voice. I made a horrible mistake. It wasn't Spam old Dan Tucker beat his wife with. What was it? Can anybody tell me? Where's my newly turned 5-year-old, so bright you have to put her in the wash pot so the sun will come out? I bet she could tell me what Dan Tucker used on his wife. I might want to beat mine someday. That's not funny, Robert, her mother said, especially for someone with the highest social aspirations. She might repeat it outside the house. What's wrong with that? People admire men who keep their wives under control. He squatted down and looked at Jeannie. Please, Birdsong, tell me what Dan Tucker used. Jeannie shook her head fast and repeatedly, as though trying to shake something off it, a dramatic gesture she used to show resolve. Ellen watched hopefully, for sometimes the shaking made Jeannie vomit. Her father would never leave them alone then, and they'd get to go swimming. Let me know if you change your mind, Birdsong, her father said when the girl's head stilled. We'll play a quick round of grab money before I go. He stood, resumed Dan Tucker, and circled the table, his slight frame moving gracefully. Time to go, Robert, her mother said. Hold your horses. Her father knelt and stuck his torso under the table. I bet you don't know why the chicken crossed the road. Jeannie sniffled. You promised we'd go swimming. I know, and I'm sorry. That was before I knew about this important dinner, which I must attend to make us more money. I know how much you like money. We can go swimming next Saturday, as early as you want. No, you said after my party. Oh, please, Birdsong, don't be mean. He made the sad clown face, lips turned down, droopy eyes he often used to tease them out of sulks. Do you want to see a grown man cry? Yes! Ellen smiled to herself. Jeannie knew his tricks. Boo-hoo, her father said, pretending to cry, which caused the dog to bark repeatedly. This is ridiculous, her mother said. She bent over to look at Jeannie. He's not breaking his promise. If he takes you next Saturday, Saturday is also after your party, isn't it? Just a little more after, that's all. So straighten up. That's not fair, Ellen said as she stepped from her hiding place. Her mother was trying to confuse Jeannie, and from the baffled look on the girl's face, it was working. It's not what Daddy meant, Ellen continued, then turned toward her father. It's too tricky, isn't it, Daddy? Ah, her father said, the too tricky unfair objection. I think you're onto something, Miss Mason. Objection sustained. Ellen felt like grinning, but the set of her mother's face said, don't. Stop this, Robert, and let's go. She'll be fine the moment we leave. You don't know that, Elizabeth. Birthdays are important. I didn't realize last night when you mentioned the dinner party that she would take it so hard. Let's cancel. Call the Benders and tell them one of the girls is sick. Yippee, Ellen thought. She'd been waiting all summer to show her father her new strokes. Her mother's fist came down on the dining room table. No, Robert, we're dressed up. Desi's here to babysit, and it's a dinner party for God's sake with the seating and everything else planned out. The Benders would never forgive us. Ellen felt like banging the table herself. If he wanted to change his mind, it wasn't her mother's business. Damn, Elizabeth, why didn't you tell me about this dinner much earlier? What? Her mother said, flinging her hand in his direction. You told me about it in May and asked me to wrangle an invitation. I volunteered at the Junior League for 2 damn weeks with Barbara Bender to get it. Besides, when do I get a chance to tell you anything? You find chances to nag me about Sandra Miller. Well, that's because you encourage her flirting and it embarrasses me. The two of them were off and running. Other problems mentioned, faces reddening. Her mother's shrill, high-pitched voice reminded Ellen of a screaming meanie, a firecracker that slithered around in the grass, screaming loud enough to burst an eardrum. Ellen, who no longer felt smug about her sustained objection, scratched at a mosquito bite on her thigh until it bled, and watched Desi, who had quietly risen from her chair, pick up wrapping paper from the living room floor. When Desi bent over, Ellen noticed the varicose veins on her thighs, which looked like fat worms crawling under her dark support hose. After a minute or so, as happened with the screaming meanie, there was sudden silence. How long since we've had a chance for a nice evening out together, Robert? Her mother's voice was surprisingly soft. Her father's eyes darted around the room like those of a cornered animal, then met Ellen's. Ellen wiped the blood from the mosquito bite on the underside of her shorts, scurried to the table, and squatted down to look at Jeannie. I'll play with you. Pick out the gifts you want to play with most, and we'll do them one after another. Then, at the end of next week, when you're bored with them, it will be Saturday and Daddy will take us swimming. You like bugs. How about the ant farm first? That's an excellent idea, said her mother, who came around the table and patted Ellen's shoulder. She had lipstick on her front tooth, the bane of having large teeth, but Ellen wasn't going to tell her. Ants aren't bugs. I want to play with the beads. The jewelry kit. Perfect, her father boomed and began to shuffle through the pile to find it. Right up Ellen's alley. You can make a necklace for Desi. Ellen looked at him in surprise. It had been 100 years since she played with kitty kits. Didn't he know her anymore? A necklace, Desi said. It would be like my birthday, too. Here it is, her father said, pulling a long, shallow box from the pile. He handed it to Ellen and smiled at her, the broad smile that usually made her smile back, but not now. The lamb's fur head poked out from under the table. I want to see. Ellen bent over to point out through the cellophane the many shapes and colors of the beads. When she looked up, her mother was out the front door and her father at the threshold. He blew her a kiss. Thanks and congratulations, he said. Heard you grab that pharmacist by the collar. Ellen grinned. He had a way of putting things which made them seem funny. It was one of the reasons she loved him.